Good. Good morning.
Good morning.
Someone who's close, Carl, maybe you could just turn the lights up just slightly there a little bit. And if you're sitting in a place where it's hard to see, please feel free to move your seat to the right or the left or forward or backward or wherever, or turn a little bit to be a little bit more comfortable. Thank you. Not to be too bright, but I just returned from a trip to Japan yesterday, so it's about 3 in the morning for me right now. So if I drift off to sleep while I'm talking, that's what's going on. We'll see if I can string together the thoughts in my mind in a way that's a little bit less like a dream and a little more like a communication, but we'll see how it goes. I had a really wonderful trip. I wasn't able to go to Japan for about 3 years until last January, so I went for the first time in for a 3-year period because of COVID and other things, and I'm so deeply connected to that place. And I was thinking last year when I went, it really struck me. I went for the first time when I was 13, and 3 years was the longest I had not been to Japan. I'm 54 now, or I was 53 last year, so it was the longest I had not been there, and it was really affecting me a lot. I don't say that to insist that anyone should go to Japan or that being steeped in Japanese culture is necessary for Buddhist practice or anything. That just happens to be my life. That is really important to me, and able to see my father-in-law who's on his deathbed now, and that was very important and special. And then I was in meetings for our particular school of Soto Zen, a denomination in Japan called Soto Shu. So I'm the assistant director of the North American office, so I have to go check in and go to the 2 head monasteries and make formal New Year's greetings and those kinds of things. So that's all I enjoy that kind of thing. So it's kind of a short and sweet, but a wonderful trip. And everything is going along. The earthquake was a bit of an impact, but not too much. And Buddhism in Japan right now is an interesting place. I'll promise I'll talk about what I said I will, but I just want to report on this a little bit. I was really struck this time. They have a rapidly shrinking population in Japan, demographic of just before the war and post-war babies were really huge. We're familiar with that, but their demographic inversion was really big. Ours is kind of big. Theirs was massive. And now that demographic is those people are passing away. And so the population is very quickly shrinking, which most countries, industrialized countries, will experience. The US, because we have so much immigration, we're not likely to experience it in the same way. But it's really transforming society. And so like all this automated stuff, they're really leaning into the automation. So like you go to a store and you just put your things in this little bucket and then touch this thing with your card and then pick the thing up and leave and never talk with anybody, or check your bags in at the airport, like you check in and check your bags for local flights, is all without people. It's really interesting. But one of the other things that's happening is the economics of running temples is really shifting, and the money is becoming scarce, and I'm so excited because that's the time for the rebirth of the tradition. And the temples have had a little bit too much money, not our temple, but and so I think it's going to be a good reforming of things, and people rediscovering the tradition, in temples, but really all over the country as a whole. So anyway, I'll stop talking about that. I want to talk about discipline, and I want to talk about inspiration. One of the traditional images of the Zen practitioner is a very disciplined person. Now, I don't know how much that resonates in Western Buddhism. I think maybe if you said, what's the image of a meditator, for example, in the West, it might be more somebody who is very, very, very chill. And maybe very, very nice. People have an image that Buddhist people are chill and they're nice. Traditional image is not that, okay? Traditional image of a person who's engaged, particularly in Zen practice, traditional, what I mean by East Asian image, would be somebody who's tough as nails, right? And doesn't put up with anything and cuts right through. That would be the image that's really strong. When I was visiting temples, I'm not saying that's a better image, by the way. I'm just saying that's with a more traditional image. When I was visiting temples this time, I went to several monasteries, including the 2 head monasteries. And I'm always reminded of this when I go, both by the way that it is that people are practicing, but then as you approach the main altar, as you come up to the main altar, where our altar is out in the same room with everything, but in a more traditional articulation of the space. The altar would be in kind of, not an encasement, but there would be like a pillar about where Anyu is and Myobun are, and then this area would be kind of its own little space. And what it provides is for a little bit of a part of a wall up high, and circled around that, a place you can't really see unless you come up to the altar and look up, are the 16 arhats. And the arhat iconography is just exactly that. Fully fulfilled renunciates, people who have given up everything, right, and have achieved the equanimity of total relinquishment. And they usually are kind of withered and bony and a little rough looking. And they circle the sacred space of the altar where the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, who usually are a little bit plumper and look a little more inviting and have a little bit more sweet kind of expression. So that's what rings that area. And arhat is a traditional understanding of a practitioner who takes up the renunciate path, gives up everything, and overcomes all afflictions through renunciation. Now, in traditional Buddhism, still maintained within the Theravadan tradition, Theravadan means the old ones, the kind of Buddhism that is in Southeast Asia primarily, this is still held up as the ideal, as what is possible in this life. The most exalted thing that is possible in this life is to live in that way and to become completely dried up of the passions. Now, in Mahayana Buddhism, the Arhat ideal is given up for the ideal of the Bodhisattva. And usually the iconography of a Bodhisattva is much more inviting, again, more pleasant, and usually plumper than the Arhat. But the Arhat is still venerated. In China in particular, if you come to a temple, in Japan this isn't quite as common, but in Chinese temples it's very common. My teacher he grew up in Taiwan, so he had a lot of influence from the Chinese, and so at his temple's this way. As you come in the front gate, there's a statue of Hote, or Putai in Chinese, which is, you would know as the fat Buddha, okay? Or like when I was teaching school, my students would always ask me, they'd say, why is the Buddha so fat? Because all they'd seen is kind of the Chinatown version of a Buddha, right? You know, it's big, round, big ears, jolly, you know, sitting very still, but completely full. So that's at the front gate. But almost no one ever sees the Arhats because they don't go up to the Buddha and then look up around to see what it is that encircles the Buddha. The reason I'm bringing this up is because when we talk about discipline, we usually split these two things. The wholeness of the sacred space of the temple, which includes both the completely full and round and accepting, and on the other side, the completely severe. The sacred has both. The path of awakening has both, but we tend to split them. And so when we come to the question of discipline, particularly this morning I'll talk about discipline in terms of the discipline of practice, of Buddhist practice, those tend to be split and we alternate between the two. And that alternation is hard to find our path when we dedicate ourselves. Like, this is the new year. This is one of the reasons I'm talking about it. Also, we're going to start a practice period here in a couple of weeks. That's also why I'm talking about it. People tend to think, it's a new year. I should do this or I should do that. Maybe one of the things you thought of is I should meditate more, or whatever it is, or I should just meditate regularly. I hope you thought that. I think that every year. When I come to the new year, I'm like, oh yeah, this will be the year. I'm going to buckle down, and that's good for us to think that. Actually, we should learn to listen to our inspiration, not just whip ourselves for not doing what it is that we think we should be doing, but what I'm talking about here is that we're inspired to something, not just the I shoulds. I don't care too much about that. I mean the thing that really inspires you. And if you're here, I'm thinking on some level, meditation inspires you. That's the only stuff. That's not the only part of Buddhist practice, but that's what I'm going to talk about this morning. Now, this quality of the arhat, just the vision of the arhat as this completely stony, dedicated, unmoving figure, has some problems with it. It has a kind of stink of self-power. Has a kind of stench of, I'm going to do it myself. Almost everybody who comes to Zen practice, you have some issues here. If you are attracted to Zen practice, you have some issues about doing it yourself. Right? If you didn't, you wouldn't be interested in Zen Buddhism. I've just learned that to be the case. Now, I'm not saying that it's super, super strong in you, but it's super, super strong in most of you. Most of you it is. And the idea that you will accomplish this through your own efforts and power, right? It just doesn't work like that. Right? But your own efforts and power are absolutely necessary to the path. They can't be left out. Right? All of the fullness and jolly of Hote, showing what life is, the vibrancy of living, is completely connected to the withered up arhat. Right? Those two, they can't be separated. And so although there is this kind of stink of self-power and all the kind of excesses and the shadows that are cast by a really stern discipline, that's not a reason to get rid of it. It's a reason to get more clear and wise about what discipline is. Right? That's what we should do, not just kick it out. Right? It's so important because if we don't have a practice that is concerned with a deep fidelity to our embodiment, then we lose the way. Right? I'm saying something a little bit maybe subtle there. Fidelity to embodiment. What I mean is there is an actuality of living. It's both a physical body, it's an emotional body, it's a psychological body, it's a spiritual body. I don't just mean fleshy in a material sense, but I mean there is the fleshiness of living, which is on all these different levels. There is a relationship which is happening continually with ourself and a world, which is very hard to say where does one begin and the other end. To stay in a relationship of faith with that continually unfolding life is what practice is offering us or encouraging us to do. And so the discipline is to face the music over and over and over and over again. Actually look at the consequences of how it is that we're living, both positive and negative, and then learn to walk the path that we're inspired to walk, right? Not to just go off into some abstraction or to be defeated. Now there's a legend about the Buddha Shakyamuni when he was practicing in the jungle, said that he had been practicing this ascetic practices for 6 years and his body was all withered up. Okay, now just a clarification, the arhats don't practice like that. Okay, so the ascetic practices that the Buddha practiced were the idea was if we could completely take all of the energy out of the container, like the physical body, then the spirit would be free. And so they really, he only ate 1 grain of rice a day is what the legends would say. And the people who practiced that way would take themselves right to the brink of death, right? With the idea that it would free the spirit to annihilate the chains of physicality. Now, the arhats ate They didn't eat that much, right? And only once a day. But the idea was that you should be nourished, because without nourishment you can't live and practice. Okay, but they kept they had different kinds of practices, like stirring all the food together, no matter what kind of food you got from your alms round, stirring it all together and eating it. Different things like that to try to get rid of the attachment to what the food would taste like and those sorts of things. Right? But at this time, the Buddha had been practicing this very other way, very unbalanced kind of a way. And it said that he was sitting one day by the river, and there was a boat floating down the river, and in the boat there was a musician with the musician's pupil. And the musician, the teacher, had said to the pupil that they were playing how do you say, lyre? Is that right? They were playing a lyre. Well, it was in India, so it wasn't actually a lyre. It was something with a name I don't know. But the teacher says to the student, if the string is too tight, it will break. But if the string is too loose, it won't make a sound. And it said that the Buddha had an insight upon hearing this and understood something about his excesses in discipline. Later on, after his awakening, the Buddha recounted this to one of his students named Sona, who was thinking about leaving the life of a renunciate practitioner, and was thinking, this is just too hard. I need to go back to this other way of practicing. But he was a very, very severe practitioner, And so the Buddha told this story. The string is too tight, it will break. If the string is too loose, it won't make the proper sound. I love this image. I don't even play any, I don't play any instruments. I was going to say I don't play any stringed instruments either, but I don't play any instruments. But everyone knows what that's like, right? We all are familiar with the resonance that comes from the string on a stringed instrument, the vibration, how inspiring that is, how connective it is. But it takes a very particular kind of attention to find the right adjustment on that string so that it vibrates in the right way. Now, if we listen to this story, one way we could understand it is just say, okay, not too tight, not too loose. But that doesn't actually give us much of a direction on how to proceed, right? It could just be a story about, well, don't be too harsh or don't be too loose. But what's too loose or what's too harsh? We don't really know. I would say if you think it's too harsh, it probably isn't, because we live in a very indulgent environment. Okay? The general statement. When it comes to physical things. When it comes to psychological and emotional things, if you think that it's not harsh enough, it's probably way more harsh than it should be. Because somehow there's an inverse relationship with our physical comfort and our capacity and proclivity to be very harsh emotionally and psychologically. I don't know what that's about, but it seems to be the case, right? So if you look at your physical, material areas, you're probably not suffering very much. Now, I'm not saying you could have a sickness, or you could not have some of the things that you need or want. I'm not saying that that's impossible. It's totally possible. General tendency is we're okay there, and we could be a little bit stricter. But on this other side, almost all of us need to turn the dial, the other direction, and find more kindness and acceptance. But what is it? How do we know? So in this story, one thing I like to point out is it's a story about music. It's a story about vibration. It's a story about something that you know it when you hear it, right? If you watch somebody tune a stringed instrument, they're boom, 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 and they're doing this, right? Our daughter Satsuki, when she used to play the ukulele, it was so cute. It would just melt you, when she would play the ukulele. And she had one of those. She started out. She had one of those little things you clip on, and then you set, and then you can. It will tell you if you hit the tone or not. But then pretty soon she didn't need that anymore. She could just hear it, right? So it's like practice. You come together, you practice with other people, you have someone giving you instruction, you get a sense of what the culture of it is, etc. It tells you something. It's not giving you a form that you need to rigidly adhere to. The tradition's trying to give you a sense of what's the resonance, okay? What's the tone, so that you can learn that and you can tune it and you can play. So we have to listen for that. The music of liberation. What is it like to be liberated from the fetters of unwholesome karma, of patterns in our life where we're replaying again and again and again the harmful things? And what is the music of the things that are carrying us beyond that kind of traps that we live in? That's the music that we're trying to listen for. That's what teaches you about what's too tight or what's too loose. Now, if it just breaks, okay, that's well, how do you even know if it breaks? I guess that's another question, right? Oftentimes we don't. But when it's too tight and it breaks, sometimes you just break down, like you can't do it anymore, kind of breaking down. But I'd say the more common thing is that you pop into rigidity. You start living out the thought of music rather than the actuality of the music, right? So you've cranked it, it's broken, you don't have the capacity to hear any music because there's no vibration, but you have the idea of it. So you just live out the idea. Now, another thing I like about this story is usually when we think about discipline, like if you think about discipline of practicing meditation on a regular basis, it's very easy to fall into the idea that you know what that is. In fact, even to have kind of a goal or to set yourself up with the idea you're going to practice in a certain way, you create a kind of picture about what I'm going to do. Oh, I'm going to meditate every day. I'm going to meditate every day for 15 minutes. Okay? It's kind of a sleight of hand. If you meditate every day for 15 minutes, you have no idea what that is. I'm saying you can't know what it is. It's completely ungraspable, as is everything, but let's just focus on meditation for a second. If you say I'm going to sit for 15 minutes every day, you can have the idea, but the actuality of it is completely it's like water running through your hands. You can't hold it. You can't say what it is. You can't know what it is. But you can encounter something on a regular basis there. Right? The discipline is not about holding, again, to a fixed form. It's about a form that is teaching you about the ungraspability of life. It's not a rigid, fixed form. It's an invitation to explore something again and again and again. So when we come to the discipline, again, it's not about doing what we know it is that we're supposed to do. It's about stepping beyond that kind of rigidity, that kind of gaining mind. That what you're saying is if I sat for 15 minutes every day, I would be a better person, whatever better person means to you, right? I'd be calmer, I'd be wiser, I'd be more tolerant of my partner or my spouse's this or that or whatever. Actually, it's not likely to happen. Whatever it is that you think it's going to make you better for sitting meditation is not likely to happen. Something way better will happen, right? Which will be living, right? Which is when you're caught in just the idea of becoming better, you stop living. You're just held in this idea of your own deficiency and this betterment that you're going to do. Another side of that kind of the rigidity of thinking that we know what we're going to do is it's very easy for us to ignore. And this is a real, like I'd say, where most of the damage comes from sitting meditation. Have you ever thought of that you could get damage from sitting meditation? Sure. You can. Yeah, you definitely can. Yeah, and not just physically. Actually, the physical stuff, you can get damage sitting meditation. But the real damage is emotional, is psychological, is spiritual. Right? Because we have a misunderstanding about what we're doing. And one of the ways that we get damaged or we inflict a kind of problem is that we think of meditation as being an opportunity to ignore ourselves. Which is really counterintuitive, because if you think if you're going to sit there still with no distractions, well, no exterior provided distractions, that you would be very, very intimate with yourself. But what you might do is you might just hang your mind on the idea of how you're making yourself better. you're going to breathe really deeply, and you're going to let go of all of these things, and then you can just sort of go around a whole bunch of who you are. Kind of chill out, you know. So that kind of ignoring can lead to a sort of bypassing. There's a term called spiritual bypassing, where you use a kind of spiritual feeling or a spiritual idea, or in this case, a kind of rigid adherence to something that you've decided is good, and it lets you ignore this whole part of your being. So again, another good way to not listen to the music, to not feel the vibration. So I'd like to give you a few practical pieces of advice. By no means an extensive list, but what I see is some of the implications of this story and this dynamic that I've been talking about for what it is to really cultivate discipline, to not split apart the full richness and the kind of dry dedication from each other as you're taking up your inspiration to sit meditation in whatever way that is for you. The first one is, this comes out of Dogen Zenji, the founder of this lineage in Japan's instructions for Zazen. He has a piece of writing called, the translation we use is called Universally Recommended Instructions for Zazen, which is a lot of syllables. And in that, there's one line where he says, have no designs on becoming a Buddha. And he gives it, that's very interesting, he gives this right in the very practical explanation about how to sit Zazen. There's a first section in the writing that's very philosophical, which is kind of like, what are we doing when we're sitting Zazen? What is this even about? And then he gets through that part, and then he goes right into the like, okay, put your right leg on your left leg, your right foot on your left thigh, and your left foot on your right thigh, and put your hands like this, right before that section. So it's in the very practical part. He says, have no designs on becoming a Buddha. The character in Chinese, this text was originally written in Chinese, the character in Chinese is just perfect to be translated as design. Okay? The character means like to make a graph of. He says, don't make a map of being a Buddha. Right? Don't try to hold the idea of what a Buddha is in your head while you're sitting. Have no designs on it, right? And that word works so well in English. So that's the first practical. I'm not saying that's philosophical teaching. That's very practical teaching. Drop it. Now, I would add to that, have no designs on becoming a Buddha or any lesser type being that you think is not what you are, but you want to be it. Okay? It doesn't even have to be as far as a Buddha. It could just be a polite person. It could be a nice person. It could be a not smelly person. Whatever it is. Okay? But you definitely have that. If you're inspired to sit Zazen, you have some image in your head about what you're going to become from sitting Zazen. You just do. And so the instruction to have none is not an instruction to beat yourself up for having one. It's an instruction for locating what that is in your attitude about meditation, and then laughing at yourself a little bit and dropping it. Okay? So you can do that on a daily basis when you sit down for meditation, or whatever your meditation schedule is like, and you sit down and just recognize, like, oh, yeah, it's like, yeah. No. Put it down. Put it down. You are a lumpy piece of flesh. Okay? With all kinds of wonderful qualities and some that could use a little rounding out. Okay? That's it. So you very purposely put that down. And all the kind of inspirations and kind of ruminations that you have about betterment, you say, no, there's something better than better. Right? There's something better than better. And that is being with what is actual, a fidelity to what is really here. Okay, second piece of advice. Make a time and a place. So with meditation, if you don't have a time and a place, you probably won't do it. There is a very rare individual who's like, I kind of sit when I can find time in the day, and they do that. That's not you. I can say that with 99% accuracy. But it might be, but it's probably not. That way, it sounds good to us because our lives are busy, and we think like, there's no way I could like have this thing and do it over and over and over and over again. But almost always, it takes a kind of what might seem like rigidity from the outside of just saying, nope, I'm getting up a half hour earlier. Whatever my routine is, that's one of the reasons that the morning is such a popular time for practicing, is you can just get up a little earlier, right? And then your routine can go on from there. When you're trying to fit it in between things, it's way harder. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that's the only time or even the best time, but saying picking a time is really important. We pick a time, but then oftentimes forget to make a place. So I usually am encouraging people, make a place to sit and put it someplace you have to walk through. Like, don't put it in a spare bedroom that's like back down a hallway somewhere or whatever that you don't ever go into. Put it like right by your bed. Or put it in the place that you have to walk to get to the bathroom, or whatever it is. Just put your cushion out there, or whatever you sit on, and then it will call to you. And when you've made the time and the place, and you're too busy and you can't sit, it will kind of wink at you, and you'll kind of wink back, and you'll know that you're not doing this thing that you want to be doing. You don't have to beat yourself up about it, but you have a communication, you have a relationship, right? Rather than just this kind of fixed idea about this or that. So time, place, and then stick to it. Stick to it. I'm of the opinion that we have become a little bit too lax in our willingness to say, sometimes you got to buck up. And I think part of it comes because we're so harsh with ourselves in many of these ways I was talking about before, psychological and emotional ways. And we confuse the message of buck up with a kind of like harsh emotionality. I'm not saying that with harshness. I'm just saying discipline is discipline. And there's no way around it. There's no trick to make discipline work. When I used to teach Japanese, and I would be teaching students Chinese characters, and there's all kinds of tricks to learn, Chinese characters when you're first learning them, but pretty soon they don't work anymore. And really, the real fact about learning Chinese is you just got to learn it. You got to write them. You got to remember them. And you might have a little bit of your own tricks that help you a little bit, but really the more that you get into it, what you find is the discipline of simply being in a relationship that is deepening, in a relationship of discovery with the graphic quality of the characters, is what allows you to become a reader of Chinese or Japanese. And they share a bunch of things. So that's how, and then you can live in that world. The form gives you a freedom. This is kind of revolutionary in North American culture. The form gives you a freedom. The breaking of the form is not what gives you a freedom. When you don't have any form, you're just lost. You can't do anything. But when you have a form, now you have a possibility of doing things. So the form, in this case, again, not an adherence to a rigidity, but an invitation. Now the form allows something to happen. So the discipline of sitting, at this point, when I say stick to it, is don't just adhere to the rigid idea of what you're doing, but come back to it again and again and again and again. And even stick to it most strongly, I would say. Stick to it when you fail. So oftentimes what happens is you're sitting, you sit for a week, that feels pretty good, and then you don't sit for a day and you're like, you're just let yourself off the hook, right? You're like, or then maybe a week has gone by, or a month has gone by, and you've barely sat at all. And then you're like, I just couldn't really do it. Let yourself off the hook. What I'm saying here is it takes a deeper kind of conviction, right? Where you're just, you're like, I'm a lumpy whatever, and I'm going to go. That's why the arhats are there around the Buddha. Not to say, we're arhats and you're not arhats and you're no good and we're good. It's because every one of us has that discipline that is fundamental to our being. And oftentimes we spend it on things that we're not very inspired by. Yeah. we have a discipline that we enact, but we enact it into things that we're not that inspired by. And so what I'm saying is, when you find the inspiration, turn it towards the thing that you are inspired by. Okay, 2 more. Shift from feeling and judging to sensing and allowing. Okay? So feeling and judging, now feeling and sensing, they could be the same word. I'm just using different words so it's easy to remember here. We have this habit of having an experience and then judging the experience. Oh, I felt like it was good, or I felt like it was bad, or whatever. I feel like I'm doing well now, or I feel like I'm not doing so well now. If you're in a real discipline of meditation, there will be times that are horrible, and there will be times that are amazing. And the amazing times are no more important than the times that are horrible. And the times that are horrible are no less important than the times that are amazing. It's just like being married, for those of you who are. Okay? Again, I'm using this word fidelity. It means you're coming back to the thing and you're staying true to it. And the part that's difficult and the part that is really feels encouraging and wonderful, they all are part of the process. So rather than feeling and then judging whether it was good or bad, or you liked it or didn't like it, or you're good or you're bad, just sense. And sensing requires you to allow. I said sense and allow as if you sense and then you allow. But you can't really sense something unless you allow it. Like the advice that you get over and over with meditation, if you come to see a teacher and you're working with some difficult emotion, almost always a teacher will ask you, where do you feel it in your body? Because we're so divorced from our physicality that we think that our emotion is happening just like in our head or like in our heart or in some disembodied place, but it's also happening in our physical body. So people, like if you're feeling a lot of anxiety, for example, it's like, well, pay attention to your breath. What do you feel? What do you feel in your breath? What's happening with it? Is it getting narrow? Is it getting tight? What's going on? Okay? Do you feel something in your chest? Do you feel something in your belly? Okay. So the sensing, to be able to sense those things, you have to have a posture of allowance. If you're in a rigid idea about what meditation is, you won't be able to sense those things. So while you've got your place, you've got your time, and you're sticking to it, don't sit down and judge what's happening. Sit down and sense and allow. Okay, last one. There could be tons, but I only have 4 for this morning. Being successful or achieving your goal of sitting, whatever that looks like for you, or failing are both escapes. Because the idea is not to have accomplished sitting for that amount of time. That's not really what the goal is. That's what it looks like when you say, oh, I want to meditate every day. Okay? But remember I said you have no idea what that is? The thing that you have no idea what it is, that's your real goal, not the label that you put on it of having sat for 15 minutes. Right? So when you dwell in kind of like, all week. Did you guys ever watch? There's this really funny video about the sickest Buddhist. Go watch that on YouTube. It's really hilarious. He's like, I'm the sickest Buddhist. And there's this one line he says, 1 hour meditation, I nailed it in 10. It's just like this perfect line. But the reason that's so funny is because that's what we do, right? Like we have this idea of what it's going to be, and then we have some kind of way that we're achieving that, and then we hang ourselves on the achievement. But then I would say that's way less problematic actually than the other one, is that it's not going quite the way that we think that it should, or we're not doing as much as we had decided we want to do, and then we label it as a failure, and then a kind of escape route appears there. So rather than being involved in that kind of judgment of achievement or failure, this is a lot like the last one, turn your mind towards attention, towards curiosity. Because that's where your inspiration dwells. You were inspired by something because it caught your attention. Right? And so that's what you want to feed. Where's your attention go? How do you keep going? Okay, and the last one is come to the temple. We have a couple minutes if anyone has any questions or comments.
Buddhist?
Mm-hmm.
Why do you meditate?
It is the most direct let me use a different. I love to walk barefoot, and I like the window to be open. And that's the way I want to live. And meditation is not just about what happens when I'm sitting down, but it's about living that way, 24/7. And sometimes I wear shoes because it's snowing, or I don't want to track dirt inside. But that's all just a practical thing. And so I find that the most inspiring way of living that I have been able to find for my own inspiration, it has to be rooted in that, or I lose the capacity to live that way.
Oh, just wonder if you could say more about allowing, because I talked a little bit about this in the intro this morning.
Oh,
not in those words, but in
Yeah.
that way of when something comes up, we don't judge it.
Yeah.
But I think saying more about that allowing, like, is it a feeling? For me, it's kind of like, but I don't know if you could just say more about that.
Yeah. So I'd say there's kind of two movements in it. The first movement, one time a person expressed it to me this way. They said, up until I started meditating regularly, I felt like I was always churning in a washing machine. Like I was always in the of the washing machine. Mm-hmm. And at some point, I just stepped out. And I was like, oh, there's the washing machine. And it's doing this. So that's one movement. Mm-hmm. So when we have enough space to not just be reactive to the things that we're experiencing, then we get to know about the presence, just being with something and not having to fiddle with it. Because so much of what's making the washing machine do is our fiddling, right? We're in there just mucking about. We don't even know it. And so the whole thing keeps going. So allowing is stepping back, relinquishing the reactivity, and being able to be present with what's ever there. The karma's there, so there's going to continue to be movement. Karma literally just means movement. So it's like inertia, and that stuff's going to keep going, but we practice just being present with it. And we learn a lot there, and it's also where a lot of knots can start coming undone because we're not just in the reactive process. This has a downside, or it has a shadow. In the shadow can be a kind of disengagement with life. And we might find ourselves just waiting for problems to go away. You're like, oh, it's in the washing machine, but I've gotten bigger than that. I'll just watch it and see if it will go away. So the other movement is we don't want to hang out there too much in the kind of like, I'm watching the washing machine thing. Once we find a little bit of spaciousness there, we want to see like, oh, there's no such thing as outside of the washing machine. Mm-hmm. Right? Actually, when I'm out here thinking I'm outside of the washing machine, that's another version of the washing machine. It's just my attitude towards things.
It's almost nihilistic to just be kind of like, whatever.
Exactly.
I'm just an asshole, so who cares?
Yeah, exactly. So what you want to do is you want to, at that point, then you want to come right into the feeling itself. Mm-hmm. Don't be a watcher. So it's helpful to put some attention on what it's like to watch. In this case is to be less reactive, just to be aware of something. But as the watcher starts to get reified, it starts to become, it has some solidity to it, then we've created another kind of problem. And that's where we need to say, no, actually I do feel angry.
Right.
It's not just
Right.
me watching myself be angry. I'm actually pissed.
Yeah.
And in that place, if you've spent some time here and you've let go of some of the reactivity, then you can become very intimate with the quality of, in this case, let's talk about emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So in the case of anger, for example, to actually be deeply present with anger is almost impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Anger wants to go somewhere.
Yeah.
It's so
It wants
energetic.
to do something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Either it wants to go out or it wants to go in. I mean, it will go anywhere, but those are the two ways, those are two strategies with it usually, is inflicted on someone else or inflicted on ourselves. But all of our emotions have some quality like that. So we don't want to ignore either side. If you just from the beginning are like, well, it's just authentic to be angry, and you sit there and indulge the anger, then you're likely not to ever, you're just sitting there fuming, right? So you need to do some relinquishment of the reactivity. So so both of those are kind of an allowance,
Yeah.
but they need each other, I would say.
Good, thank you. I think that was helpful. Hopefully to the folks who were at intro also.
Great. Great. Probably one more.
That would be advice for hackers.
Hackers?
When it comes to discipline, I've noticed in myself, I try to be efficient, and that means it doesn't really work.
Yeah. That's a really good. It's a good point. When you have the kind of mind that is always trying to get to the, whatever. So one of the things that comes to mind is, what are you hacking? Like, what are you going to get? Like, what are you going to get from the hacking? What do you think the prize is?
It's kind of like what you're saying, I'm going to be a better person, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to get there the easiest way possible.
Right. Yeah. So that, you can't, trying to hack the hack won't work, right? And so getting really intimate with that part of your, the part of your being that has that karma, has that pattern in it. That's what's important, and you probably need to have some conscious resistance to it. So noticing it, and then being able to name the patterns, and then being able to ruthlessly face them and relinquish them. And that's the side that, when I say discipline, that's what I mean. That we see our own weaknesses, and then we purposely take action in relationship to those weaknesses to transform them. And so you know it, but part of the reason you know it is because you're so smart. And so the part that allows you to know it is that smartness, and so then you'll try to outsmart your smartiness, and so that it's just like the mirrors, So it's really important for people who are smart like you are to get a little stupid about it, and that's what I mean by the ruthless. Is just be a little bit like, it ain't no fancy trick. It's just like, oh, I don't want to live like that. And when you really feel that in yourself, of course you don't always feel that way, otherwise you wouldn't do it all the time. But you feel that, when you really feel that, would be like, I don't want to do that, and then double down and be nice, but be nice to yourself.